I was 19 years old the night I realized I was completely, utterly alone. The room I found myself in wasn't much of a room at all. Four cracked walls, a floor that smelled of dust and dampness, and a single window that wouldn't close properly. The wind whistled through the gap, making the curtains sway even though there was no fan, no air conditioning, nothing. Just that draft reminding me every second that I didn't belong there. The bulb in the ceiling flickered weakly, buzzing like a dying fly, throwing shadows across the corners. I sat on the cold floor, knees pressed tight to my chest, my back against the wall. And this was supposed to be my freedom. All I had with me was a backpack, half empty. Inside it, two shirts, a toothbrush, my headphones, and a small journal where I had scribbled things I was too afraid to say out loud. That was it. No bed, no blanket, no food, nothing that said, "This is home." I remember pulling my phone out of my pocket. 6% battery left. I stared at the screen like it was my last lifeline, even though I had no one to call. No friends I trusted enough to tell the truth. No family who would even care that I was gone. The silence was heavy. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that presses against your chest, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat loudly. I thought about turning on music just to fill the emptiness, but I stopped myself. I wanted to sit with the reality of it. Because reality was brutal. I was on my own. For the first time in my life, there was no one to tell me what to do, no one to shout at me, no one to silence me. But instead of feeling free, I felt like a prisoner who had been thrown into a bigger cage. I whispered to myself over and over, "You wanted freedom, right? Well, here it is." But even as I said it, the words sounded hollow. Freedom didn't taste sweet that night. It tasted bitter, like fear. I remember laying down flat on the floor using my backpack as a pillow. The ground was so cold it seeped into my bones. I wrapped my jacket around myself, but it wasn't enough. My body shivered, and I could feel the sting of tears pushing against my eyes. And the hunger. God, the hunger. I hadn't eaten properly that day. The last thing I'd had was a piece of bread I stuffed into my mouth before storming out of the house. Now, as I lay there in that lifeless room, my stomach growled so loud it almost echoed. I pressed my hand against my stomach as if I could silence it, but there was no silencing it. Hunger has a voice, and that night it spoke louder than my thoughts. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly, but sleep refused. Instead, my mind replayed every single moment that had led me there, every word, every fight, every secret, and then came the question that almost broke me. Had I made a mistake? Had I been foolish to leave with nothing? To run away without a plan? To choose loneliness and hunger over the chaos of the place I once called home? I thought about my mother's face, the sharpness in her eyes, the way her words had sliced through me like knives. "You should be grateful I even kept you." That sentence stabbed me all over again. And my father, silent as always, sitting in his chair while his child's world collapsed. Not a word, not even a glance in my direction. No, I told myself, I hadn't made a mistake. Staying there would have destroyed me in a different way. At least here, in this empty room, the only enemy I had to fight was my own fear. So I lay there in the darkness, staring at the cracked ceiling. My tears dried slowly on my face, leaving my skin stiff and salty. The bulb above me flickered one last time before finally going out, plunging the room into shadows. The city outside continued its restless symphony. Cars honking in the distance, dogs barking, someone shouting 2 streets away. But inside that room, all I had was silence, hunger, and the weight of a new beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. My eyes stayed open, adjusting to the dark, scanning every corner of the room. Every creak of the walls made me jump. Every gust of wind through the broken window made me shiver. I thought about the future, about tomorrow, about what I would eat, where I would work, how long I could last before money ran out. And then I thought about the past, about the things I had discovered, about the secret that pushed me to this point. I couldn't bring myself to face it yet, not fully, but it haunted me, whispering at the edges of my mind, daring me to remember. I clenched my fists and whispered into the darkness, "You will survive this. Even if it kills you, you will survive this." That night, 19 years old and utterly alone, I wasn't sure if I believed my own words, but I repeated them anyway, like a prayer, like a curse, like a promise. And that's how my new life began. On the floor of an empty room, hungry, broken, afraid, but determined to survive. Before I tell you about what happened after I left, you need to understand where I came from. Because people always ask, why didn't you just stay at home until you figured things out? And the truth is, they don't know what home really meant for me. On the outside, my family looked normal. We weren't rich, but we weren't starving either. We had food on the table, clothes on our backs, and a roof over our heads. If you saw us in public, you'd probably think we were just another average family. Smiling in church, taking pictures at weddings, sitting quietly at family gatherings. But behind closed doors, everything was different. The walls of our house carried tension. You could feel it the moment you walked in. It was in the way my mother's voice sharpened at the smallest mistake. It was in the way my father's silence filled every corner. It was in the way I tiptoed around, always careful not to say the wrong thing, not to breathe too loudly, not to exist in a way that bothered anyone. Growing up, I learned early that love in that house came with conditions. If you did well in school, you might get a smile. If you did poorly, you got shame. If you agreed with everything, you were obedient. If you disagreed, you were disrespectful. I can't remember the last time my mother told me she was proud of me. What I do remember is the way she criticized me for things so small they barely mattered. The wrong shoes, the wrong friends, the wrong tone of voice. And my father, he was a ghost in his own home. Always there, but never really there. Sitting in his chair, staring at the TV, pretending not to hear the shouting. He didn't protect me, he didn't defend me, he didn't even speak. And sometimes, I wondered if he even noticed me at all. I grew up feeling invisible, like I could disappear and nobody would notice. But there were moments that stuck with me, moments that cut so deep I couldn't forget them, no matter how hard I tried. Like the time I came home excited to show my mother an award I had won in school. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd smile, maybe she'd hug me, maybe she'd say she was proud. Instead, she looked at the paper, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Is this the best you could do?" That night I cried into my pillow, holding the certificate like it was worthless. Or the time I overheard on the phone, telling someone how difficult I was, how I never listened, how she wished I was different. Hearing that broke something in me. Because if your own mother doesn't like who you are, who else will? I started shrinking, not physically, but emotionally. I stopped sharing things. I stopped speaking my mind. I learned to laugh when I wanted to cry, to smile when I was hurting, to keep my secrets buried deep because I knew nobody wanted to hear them. But even then, even in that pain, I told myself, at least my family is my family. At least when the world is cruel, I can come home and know where I belong. Until the day I found out that wasn't true. That discovery, that secret, shattered everything. It was late one night. I was supposed to be asleep. My mother was in the living room, whispering on the phone. But the walls in our house were thin. Her words slipped through like poison, and what I heard made my blood run cold. She wasn't talking about work. She wasn't talking about friends. She was talking about me, about my birth, about my father, or rather, the man I thought was my father. I lay frozen in my bed, every word searing itself into my brain. My chest felt tight, my stomach twisted. I wanted to run out and scream at her. "What are you saying?" "What do you mean?" But I couldn't move. That night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, my whole world tilting sideways. The next day, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, that I had heard wrong, that maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something about my life was a lie. A week later, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I confronted her. I stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking, and I asked her straight, "Who is my father?" For a moment, she froze. Her eyes narrowed, and then she said it. The words that burned into me forever. "You should be grateful I even kept you." That was it. No explanation, no kindness, just a dagger straight to my chest. I felt the air leave my lungs, my legs wobbled, my heart shattered. In that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't wanted. Not really, not fully. And that's when the thought first entered my mind. I have to leave. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in a house built on lies. The night everything finally exploded wasn't supposed to be different from any other. That's the scary part. It started like an ordinary evening, the kind of night that hides its sharp teeth until you're already bleeding. The air inside the house was thick, heavy. I could smell stew simmering on the stove. mixed with the faint staleness of cigarette smoke from my father's corner of the living room. The TV buzzed with the evening news, but nobody was watching it. My mother was pacing, her footsteps sharp against the tiles, her voice already climbing even though I hadn't said a word yet. I sat at the dining table, pushing my food around my plate. I wasn't hungry. I hadn't been hungry in days, not really. Hunger had been replaced with something else, a gnawing, restless ache in my chest that never left me alone. Then it started. "You think you're grown now, don't you?" she snapped, slamming a spoon against the counter so hard stew splattered across the stove. "Walking around here like you don't need anyone, like you're better than this family." I kept my head down. I'd learned the hard way that answering only made it worse. Silence was safer, but silence wasn't enough that night. "You never listen," she hissed. "You're ungrateful. Everything you have, everything you eat, everything you wear, it's because of me. And you still look at me with that face? Like I'm your enemy?" Her voice cracked something inside me. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. "Say something," she shouted, slamming the spoon down again. My father sat in his chair in the corner, staring at the TV, pretending it wasn't happening. His silence screamed louder than her shouting. He was always there, but never there. And then she said it, the sentence that ripped the last thread holding me in that house. "You should be grateful I even kept you." Time stopped. The sound of the TV faded. The smell of stew disappeared. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Grateful? Grateful for what? For being treated like a stranger in my own home? For carrying a secret I never asked for? For being reminded every day that I was never enough? I looked up at her, and for the first time, I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry. I was empty. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. She stared at me, waiting for me to explode, waiting for me to fight back. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I walked upstairs into my room. My heart was pounding, but my mind was strangely calm. I pulled out my backpack from under the bed and started shoving clothes into it. A couple of shirts, jeans, socks, my toothbrush, my journal. I opened my drawer and found the little money I had been saving. Crumpled notes, barely enough to survive a week. I stuffed it in. My hands shook as I zipped the bag, but my decision was clear. I turned one last time to look at my room. The posters on the wall, the unmade bed, the stuffed animal on the shelf that had been with me since childhood. It all looked smaller, weaker, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I slung the backpack over my shoulder and walked back downstairs. She was waiting in the kitchen, her arms crossed, her face hard. "Where do you think you're going?" I didn't answer. I walked past her, past my father, past the TV still buzzing in the corner. My hand touched the doorknob, and for a second, I hesitated. My whole life was behind me. The lies, the shouting, the silence, the betrayal. If I opened that door, there would be no coming back. I took a deep breath, and then I opened it. The cool night air hit my face like a slap. I stepped outside, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, my chest tight, but my steps firm. I didn't look back. Not once. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. This house will never see me again. What I didn't know was that walking out that door wouldn't be the hardest part. The hardest part was what came next. The nights that followed, the hunger, the loneliness, the knock on the door that almost made me break. But that night, that breaking point, that was the night I stopped being a child. That was the night I chose survival. And survival is not as simple as people think. The first night on my own is a memory burned so deeply into me that I can still smell the dampness of that room whenever I close my eyes. I had managed to find a tiny, half-forgotten apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't mine, not really. Just a place a friend of a friend had mentioned. The kind of place where the landlord didn't ask too many questions as long as you handed over something that looked like money. The walls were cracked, yellowed with age, and the single light bulb dangling from the ceiling flickered like it was gasping for life. The window didn't lock properly, and the night air slipped in, carrying the sounds of barking dogs, distant motorcycles, and the occasional shout from the street below. I sat on the cold tiled floor with my backpack beside me. My whole world had shrunk down to that bag. A couple of shirts, a toothbrush, a few crumpled bills, no bed, no blanket, just me and four walls that felt like they were already closing in. And that's when it hit me. I was free, yes, but I was also rising in me. For years, I had dreamed of leaving that house. I thought walking out the door would feel like liberation, like finally being able to breathe. But sitting in that empty room, it felt less like freedom and more like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into nothing. The silence was unbearable. Back home, even when it was tense, there was always noise. My mother shouting, dishes clattering, the TV droning on. Here, the silence pressed against my ears until I swore I could hear my own heartbeat echoing. I told myself, "You're strong. You wanted this. You can handle it." But strength feels different when you're alone in the dark with nothing but your thoughts. I laid down on the floor using my backpack as a pillow. The tiles were cold against my skin, and no matter how I curled up, the chill sank into my bones. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but every creak, every rustle outside made my heart race. I imagined shadows moving across the walls. I imagined someone breaking in. I imagined my mother standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her voice dripping with regret. "I told you so." That night, I barely slept at all. The next morning, I woke with my body aching from the hard floor. My stomach growled so loudly, it almost scared me. I hadn't eaten since the day before, when I'd left half my dinner untouched on the table. I dug into my bag and pulled out the crumpled notes I had saved. Not much. Barely enough for rent and food for a few days. I walked down to the corner shop and bought the cheapest bread I could find, along with a small sachet of water. The cashier looked at me with bored eyes, sliding the bread across the counter, but I felt like she could see right through me. Like she knew I was broke. Like she knew I was a runaway with nowhere to go. Back at the apartment, I tore into the bread like it was a feast. But after swallowing a few bites, the heaviness in my chest made it hard to eat. Bread filled my stomach, but it didn't quiet the emptiness inside me. The second night was worse. Hunger had been replaced by fear. Every sound outside the window made me jump. At one point, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging, deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. My heart thudded so loud I thought whoever it was could hear it. The footsteps stayed for what felt like forever, and then moved on. I didn't sleep at all after that. By the third night, my mind started to betray me. I kept flashing back to the moment I left the house, my mother's face, my father's silence, the spoons slamming on the counter, and those words, "You should be grateful I even kept you." It replayed in my head over and over like a cruel movie on loop. I found myself whispering into the empty room as if she could hear me. I didn't ask to be kept. I didn't ask for any of this. I cried that night. I cried until my chest hurt, until my face was wet and sticky with tears, until there were no more tears left to cry. But even in the middle of that storm, a small voice inside me said, "Don't go back. No matter how bad it gets, don't go back." On the fourth night, I tried to distract myself. I scribbled in my journal by the light of the flickering bulb, writing down everything I was too scared to say out loud. I wrote about my fears, about the lies, about the hunger, and then, almost without meaning to, I wrote about hope, about what life could look like if I survived this. A bed of my own, a job that paid enough to eat 3 meals a day, friends who actually wanted me around. The journal became my lifeline. But survival is more than writing dreams in a notebook. By the 5th night, I realized I had to act. My money was disappearing. My body felt weaker. My mind was slipping. If I didn't find a way to earn something soon, I'd be back on the streets with nothing. That night, as I lay awake on the cold tiles, I promised myself, tomorrow I'd find work. Any work. No matter how dirty, no matter how hard. But as I closed my eyes, I didn't know that survival would test me in ways I never expected. Because survival isn't just about finding food or paying rent. Sometimes survival knocks on your door in the middle of the night, and when I heard that knock, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. The morning after that knock at the door, I woke with my heart still racing. I hadn't answered it. I couldn't. Fear had kept me frozen to the floor, my hand clamped over my mouth as if even breathing too loud would give me away. But the sound stayed with me, that slow, deliberate rapping. Not a neighbor, not a random accident. Someone had stood outside that fragile wooden door, knowing I was inside, and chosen not to leave right away. By sunrise, when the first slivers of light crept through the cracked window, the fear had hardened into determination. Whoever had been at that door could come back. If I was going to survive here, I couldn't just hide behind four walls, wasting away on cheap bread and tap water. So I stood up, brushed the dust from my clothes, splashed my face with cold water from the leaky tap in the corner, and told myself, today, you work. Today, you fight. The city felt louder than ever that day. The streets buzzed with motorcycles weaving through traffic like women selling food at the roadside, shouting over one another, horns blaring impatiently. The smell of fried beans and smoke filled the air, making my empty stomach growl. I walked block after block, stopping at small shops and stalls. Do you need help? Any work? Anything? Most people barely looked at me before shaking their heads. Others laughed. One man glanced at my skinny frame and said, "You look like you'd collapse if I asked you to carry a box. Move on." By noon, sweat clung to my back, my legs ached, and humiliation burned in my chest. For every 20 doors I tried, maybe one person actually listened. And still, no one hired me. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. Finally, just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, I found a small food stall near the market. The owner, a woman with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd seen decades of labor, stared at me for a long time after I asked for work. "You can wash plates?" she said, her voice flat. "Yes," I lied. She looked me up and down. "You'll start tomorrow." Food. It wasn't much, barely enough to scrape by. But it was something. I nodded, bowing slightly in gratitude. "Thank you." That night, for the first time since I'd left home, I felt a spark of hope. The work was harder than I imagined. Plates stacked higher than my head, greasy with oil, bits of rice and beans stuck like glue. The sink was always clogged, the water freezing in the morning and scalding in the afternoon. My hands blistered, the skin peeling until they stung with every movement. But the rhythm of work distracted me. Scrub, rinse, stack. Scrub, rinse, stack. The noise of customers, the sizzle of frying oil, the chatter of the market, all of it drowned out the silence that had haunted me in that empty room. Some customers treated me like I was invisible. Others sneered, tossing their plates down carelessly, muttering about the boy with no shoes. But every evening, the owner would press a few crumpled notes into my hand, and those notes meant bread, water, survival. Still, survival wasn't easy. There were nights I came back to the apartment with barely enough energy to climb the stairs. Nights I curled up on the cold floor, clutching my aching stomach because one loaf of bread had to stretch across 2 days. Nights when the sound of footsteps in the hallway made me sit up, heart pounding, remembering the knock at the door. That sound never left me. One evening, after another long day at the stall, I returned to the apartment and found something waiting at my door. A small envelope. No name, no address. Just an envelope lying there like it had been carefully placed. My hands shook as I picked it up. Inside, I found a single piece of paper. On it were 3 words, scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. "You can't hide." I dropped the note like it had burned me. My breath came fast and shallow. Who had left it? The landlord? Someone from home? Was my mother looking for me? I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, staring at the envelope on the floor. The silence of the room felt louder than ever. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway felt like footsteps coming for me. Every shadow on the wall looked like someone waiting. And yet, I didn't run. Something inside me refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the simple fact that I had nowhere else to go. But I stayed. I learned to smile at customers, even when they mocked me. I learned to ignore the ache in my back, the burn in my hands. I learned that survival isn't about winning. It's about refusing to lose. But the loneliness, that was harder. Sometimes I caught myself staring at families in the market, parents laughing with their kids, friends sharing food together. And in those moments, the hunger in my chest was worse than the hunger in my stomach. I wanted someone. Anyone. Someone who would look at me and see more than just a runaway washing plates for scraps. One night, as I lay on the floor scribbling in my journal, I wrote a sentence that made my hand tremble. If I disappeared, would anyone even notice? I stared at the words until tears blurred them. And then I tore out the page and burned it with a match, watching the paper curl into ash. Because no matter how dark it got, I wasn't ready to give up. The second knock. It happened exactly 3 weeks after the first one. I was lying on the floor half asleep when the sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, measured, familiar. My blood ran cold. I sat up, clutching my journal to my chest like a shield. The room was pitch dark, the only light a faint glow from the street lamp outside. The knocks continued. "Who's there?" I whispered, though my voice was so quiet I doubt anyone heard. Silence. Then another knock, harder this time. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent against the floor. My hand hovered over the knob. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. And then, a voice. Soft, almost gentle, but chilling in the stillness of the night. "I know who you are." My knees buckled. I stumbled back, knocking into the wall. By the time I gathered the courage to press my eye against the crack of the door, the hallway was empty. Just silence, just shadows. But in my gut, I knew this wasn't over. Whoever they weren't finished with me. And as much as I tried to bury it, a thought whispered in the back of my mind, what if survival isn't just about hunger and money? What if survival means facing the ghost that followed me out of that house? The days that followed the second knock blurred together in a haze of exhaustion, hunger, and paranoia. By morning, I forced myself into routine. Wake up, splash water on my face, walk to the stall, wash plates until my hands ached, collect my meager pay, walk back to the apartment, collapse on the floor. But by night, every sound became a threat. Every creak of the hallway, every shuffle of feet, every murmur from neighbors, they all felt like signs. Signs that someone was coming for me. And in the silence, my mind filled in the blanks. Sometimes I pictured my mother standing outside, her shadow long and sharp against the door, waiting for the right moment to drag me back with that look of disgust that had haunted me my whole life. Other times, I imagined strangers. People I didn't know, but who somehow knew me. People who whispered about me in corners, who left notes at my door that said, "You can't hide." I told myself it was paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Even at the stall, I couldn't escape the weight pressing on me. The owner noticed first. She caught me scrubbing the same plate over and over again one afternoon, lost in my thoughts. "What's wrong with you?" she snapped, her voice sharp like a whip. "You're slow today. Customers don't wait." "Sorry," I mumbled, quickly dunking the plate into the water. She narrowed her eyes. "If you can't keep up, I'll find someone else." The threat stung, not because I loved the work, I hated every second of it, but because I couldn't afford to lose it. This was my only lifeline. I worked faster, harder, ignoring the burn in my blistered hands, ignoring the hunger gnawing at my stomach. By the end of the day, my body felt like it had been beaten with stones. And yet, when she pressed the few crumpled bills into my palm, I felt a flicker of relief. Money meant bread. Money meant one more day of survival. But money didn't silence the knocking in my head. It came 5 nights after the second. This time I wasn't asleep. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, scribbling in my journal by the dim light of a candle. The bulb had finally died 2 days earlier. The knock was louder this time. Hard, demanding. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, my pen hovering over the paper. My whole body went rigid like an animal sensing a predator nearby. The knocks came again. Knock, knock, knock. I crept toward the door, my breath shallow. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer. My hands trembled as I pressed my ear to the wood. The silence on the other side felt heavy, alive. And then, the sound of something slipping under the door. I stumbled back as a folded piece of paper slid across the floor and landed at my feet. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my chest tight, my legs weak. Then slowly, I crouched down and picked it up. 4 words. That's all it said. "You can't escape blood." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the paper. Blood. My blood? My family? Was this about my mother, my father? I tore the note into tiny pieces and flushed them down the cracked toilet. But those words stuck in my mind like thorns. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next week was torture. Every time someone glanced at me in the market, I wondered if they were the ones leaving the notes. Every stranger's face became suspicious. Every whisper felt like it was about me. I began avoiding people as much as I could. Walking home quickly, keeping my head down at work, eating alone in silence. But the less I interacted, the more the walls closed in on me. The apartment began to feel like a prison, the silence inside it louder than the chaos outside. And still, every night, I listened for the knock. Sometimes it didn't come. Those nights were the worst, because the waiting was its own kind of torture. Other times, I thought I heard it faintly, only to realize it was just my heartbeat in my ears. I was unraveling. One night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I drifted into a memory. I was 13 again, sitting at the kitchen table. My mother's face was red with anger as she slammed her hand down. "You think you can just walk away from me? You think you can survive without me? You're nothing. Nothing without this house, without me." Her words had cut deep then, but now, lying alone in that cold room, they cut even deeper. Because what if she was right? What if all of this, the hunger, the paranoia, the notes, was proof that I couldn't survive without her? But then I remembered the look on her face the day I walked out. The mixture of fury and disbelief, the way she hadn't even tried to stop me. No, I told myself, I wasn't going back. I'd rather starve on the floor of this broken apartment than crawl back to that house and beg for her approval. It came 2 weeks later. This time there was no knock, no warning. I returned from work, my clothes damp with sweat, my hands raw, and found it pinned to my door with a rusty nail. The handwriting was the same, jagged, uneven. "Soon, you'll have to face it." My knees nearly buckled as I read the words. Face what? Who was tormenting me? What were they waiting for? I tore the note down, crushed it in my fist, and threw it across the room. But even without the paper, the words hung in the air like smoke. That night, I locked the door with the flimsy bolt and pushed my backpack against it. I curled up on the floor, my eyes wide open, staring at the shadows until morning. The following day at work, I dropped a stack of plates. They shattered on the floor, shards scattering across the stall. The owner's face twisted with rage. "Are you trying to ruin me?" she screamed. I'm sorry," I stammered, bending down to pick up the pieces. "You're careless, useless. If you can't do something as simple as washing plates, then leave." Her words hit me like blows. I wanted to beg, to explain, but the fire in her eyes told me it was pointless. So I left. Just like that. My only source of income, gone. The walk back to the apartment felt like a funeral march. My head hung low, my stomach empty, my future darker than ever. When I reached my door, another note was waiting. But this one was different. It wasn't folded, it wasn't short, it was a full sheet of paper, covered in writing. My hands shook as I read it. "You think you can run from the truth. You think distance will erase the past. But blood is blood, and you can't cut it off. Soon, it will find you. Soon you'll have to choose. Face what you left behind, or let it consume you." I dropped the note, my heart hammering in my chest. Whoever was doing this, they knew me. They knew my past. They knew about the blood I was trying so hard to escape. And for the first time, a thought crept into my mind that terrified me more than hunger, more than loneliness, more than the knocks. What if this wasn't a stranger at all? What if the one tormenting me was someone I already knew? That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting. And then it came. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, my whole body trembling. A voice followed. Not soft this time, not chilling, but clear. Strong, familiar. Open the door. It's time we talk. My blood turned to ice, because I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in months, but I knew it like I knew my own heartbeat. It was my mother. Her voice, I hadn't heard it in months, but the second it hit my ears, everything inside me froze. It wasn't just a voice, it was a weapon, sharp and familiar, dragging me back to every wound she'd ever carved into me. Open the door. It's time we talk. I pressed my back harder against the wall, as if I could sink into the concrete and disappear. My breath came in shallow gasps. My mind screamed 2 words over and over. Not possible. Not here. And yet there she was. I could hear the faint scrape of her shoes shifting against the hallway tiles. She was real. She was inches away from me. The knock came again, slower this time, almost patient. Knock, knock. "You can't stay silent forever," she said. Her tone wasn't raised, but it wasn't soft either. It was measured, like she knew she already had me trapped. My hands clenched into fists on my knees. Part of me wanted to shout back to tell her to leave, laugh to let me rot in peace if that's what she wanted. But another part, the weaker, smaller part I hated, longed for something else, for her to say she missed me, that she was sorry, that she wanted me back. But deep down, I knew better. My mother's love had always been conditional, sharp-edged, something you had to earn by bleeding for it. The silence stretched. "Do you really think you can hide from me?" she asked finally. "Do you really think you can erase me from your life like I never existed?" Her words pierced me, because that's exactly what I had been trying to do. I curled tighter into myself, biting my lip until I tasted blood. Her voice unlocked memories I had buried under exhaustion and hunger. I was 11 again, standing in the living room holding a drawing I'd made at school. She had looked at it for a second before tearing it in half. "Stop wasting your time. Art won't put food on the table." I was 15, begging her not to tell my father about the money I'd secretly saved. She told him anyway. He took it. "Nothing in this house belongs to you," she had said. And then I was 18, standing in that same kitchen, listening to her spit out the words that had finally broken me. "You should be grateful I even kept you." My stomach twisted, my body shook, and still her voice called me back to that moment. Then I heard it, the faint rattle of the handle. I shot forward, pressing both hands against the wood as if my body weight could hold it shut. "Don't you dare," I whispered. "Don't I dare?" Her laugh was low, humorless. "I gave you life. You belong to me. And you think you can slam doors in my face?" My throat tightened. I wanted to scream that I didn't belong to her, that I never had, that all she'd given me was scars I couldn't peel off my skin. But I stayed silent, and silence, I realized, was worse, because silence gave her power. Finally, I shouted, "Go away." The word echoed through the small apartment, bouncing off the bare walls, sounding louder than I expected. My chest heaved. For a long moment, she said nothing. I almost thought she had left. And then in a tone so calm it chilled me to the bone, she said, "You really think I'm the enemy here? You think leaving made you free? No, you're still tied to me, to us, and soon you'll see you can't run from blood." That word again, blood. I stumbled back from the door, my heart hammering. "What do you mean?" I whispered, though I hadn't meant to speak out loud. She chuckled like she had been waiting for me to ask. "There are things you don't know," she said. "Things about your father, things about me, about you. You can pretend you cut me off, but the truth will always find you." Her voice grew sharper. "Open the door. I'll tell you everything." I stared at the handle. My hand twitched toward it, then recoiled. Every instinct screamed not to open it. I knew what waited on the other side. Pain, manipulation, the same cycle I had barely escaped. But there was something else too. A pull I couldn't ignore. The notes, the knocks, the cryptic warnings. They hadn't been random. They had been leading here, to this moment. And if I didn't open the door now, would I ever know the truth? My stomach churned. Sweat dripped down my temples. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood. "Please," I whispered. But I wasn't sure who I was pleading with. Her? Myself? God? Finally, my shaking hand reached out. The metal of the handle was cold, biting into my skin. I turned it slowly. The door creaked open. The face I knew too well. There she was. Her face was sharper than I remembered. Her cheekbones more pronounced, her eyes darker, sunken, almost hollow. But it was undeniably her. My mother. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared. Her gaze bore into me, searching, dissecting. Mine trembled under the weight of everything I had once wanted from her, but never received. "You look thin," she finally said, her voice flat, not concerned, like an observation. Anger surged in me. That was the first thing she noticed, not the months of silence, not the fact that I had disappeared, just that I looked thin. "What do you want?" I spat. She smirked, tilting her head slightly. "To talk, to explain, to remind you who you are." "I know who I am," I shot back. Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, you don't." She stepped closer and I instinctively stepped back. "There are things I never told you," she said, "about why our house was the way it was, about why I said the things I did, about why your father stayed silent all those years." I shook my head. "I don't want to hear your excuses." "These aren't excuses," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. "These are truths, ugly truths, and whether you like it or not, they're yours too. Because blood doesn't lie." That word again, blood. I swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes locked on mine. "Your father isn't who you think he is, and neither am I. You think your life has been hard so far? You don't even know where the hardness began." My legs felt weak. My throat went dry. "You're lying," I whispered, though my voice cracked with doubt. She shook her head slowly. "No, I'm giving you a chance to understand before it's too late." Before I could respond, movement in the hallway caught my eye. A shadow. Someone else was standing there. Tall. Still. Silent. I turned back to my mother, panic rising in my chest. "Who is he?" didn't answer. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. The shadow stepped closer, and though I couldn't see the face, I felt the weight of its presence. And in that moment, I realized something far worse than my mother finding me. She hadn't come alone. The figure stepped forward, slow and deliberate, each movement echoing in the narrow hallway. The dim light overhead flickered, catching the edge of a broad shoulder, a tall frame, and hands that stayed hidden in the pockets of a dark coat. I froze. My eyes darted to my mother, waiting, hoping for some explanation, but she only stood there, watching me with that same unsettling smile, as if she had been waiting for this very moment. "Who is that?" I demanded, my voice sharper this time. The stranger stopped just a few feet away. Though his face was still shadowed, I could feel his eyes on me, heavy, unyielding. My mother finally spoke. "This is someone you should have met a long time ago." The words hit me like ice water. My stomach twisted, my throat went dry. The stranger took another step, and at last, the light caught his face. A man, mid-40s maybe. Strong jaw, dark eyes, a scar running down the side of his cheek. He didn't look familiar, and yet something in his features tugged at me, like a puzzle piece I didn't know I had been missing. I shook my head. "I don't know him." "You should," my mother said softly, "because he knows you." The man's voice was low, steady. "I've been waiting to meet you." His words made my skin crawl. "Why?" I snapped. "Who are you?" He hesitated, glancing at my mother before looking back at me. "Let's just say, I'm connected to your father, to everything you were never told." My heart pounded harder. The air in the hallway felt heavy, suffocating. "Stop speaking in riddles," I said. "What do you want from me?" He tilted his head, studying me the way someone studies a locked door they're about to force open. "The truth," he said simply, "and whether you like it or not, you're part of it." I stepped back into the apartment, gripping the edge of the door. Every instinct screamed at me to slam it shut, lock it, never open it again. But my legs felt rooted to the floor. My mother didn't move. She just watched, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. If her hat, "You can keep running," she said, "but you'll never outrun where you come from. We're all bound to it. You, me, and him." Her words dripped with finality, as if she was sealing a fate I had never chosen. The man finally stepped fully into the light. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time I saw it, not just the scar, not just the sharpness of his features, but something unsettlingly familiar in the way he held himself. "You don't recognize me," he said quietly, "but you will, because your story starts with mine." And before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, something that made my blood run cold. His hand slid from the pocket of his coat, slow, deliberate. I braced myself for a weapon, a knife, a gun, something sharp and final. My breath stuck in my throat, my knees trembled. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon at all. It was an envelope, thick, yellowed at the edges like it had been carried too long, passed through too many hands. He held it up, eyes locked on mine. "This," he said, "belongs to you." For a moment, I just stared, confused, relieved but unsettled all the same. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother's lips curled into a thin smile. "Proof," she said. He extended it toward me. My hands shook as I reached out, the paper rough against my fingertips. I held it, staring at it as if the thing might bite me. "Go on," he urged. "Open it." I hesitated. Some part of me wanted to throw it down, burn it before even looking inside. But curiosity is a cruel master. Slowly, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a stack of folded papers. The first page made my stomach lurch. It was a birth certificate. Mine. Only not the one I remembered. The father's name was different. Not the man who had raised me in that cold, bitter house. Not the man whose silence had been as violent as my mother's words. A different name entirely. I blinked, shaking my head, convinced I was misreading. "This isn't real," I said. "This has to be fake." The man's voice was steady, heavy with certainty. "It's real. I've kept it for years, waiting for this moment." My mother finally spoke, her voice low but cutting. "The man you called your father, he wasn't. He never was. He knew it too. That's why he hated you, why he looked at you the way he did." Her words sliced through me. My chest tightened, my throat burned. "No," I whispered, my hands trembling as I clutched the paper. "You're lying. You're both lying." The man shook his head slowly. "I wish we were." I looked at him again, really looked, and for the first time I saw it, the similarity in the shape of the jaw, the way his eyes narrowed, the scarred intensity that somehow mirrored the storm in my own reflection. The thought hit me like a blow. Could this man be? My knees weakened. The room tilted. He stepped closer. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I'm here because you deserve to know who you are and what you're tied to." The words hung in the air, thick, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to deny everything. But all I could do was stand there, shaking, clutching that paper like it might dissolve if I let go. Finally, I forced the words out. "Who are you?" He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "I'm the man whose blood runs in your veins," he said. "I'm your real father." The words split me open. My head shook violently as if I could physically reject them. No, that's impossible. My mother's smile was cold. "You always wondered why he hated you. Now you know. You weren't his. You were his burden, his shame." Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "If this is true," I said hoarsely, "why now? Why come here? Why let me grow up in that house with him if you knew?" His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. "Because there are things worse than absence. And I thought keeping my distance was protecting you." He looked at my mother then, bitterness flashing in his gaze. "But she made sure you carried every wound instead." I turned to her, my chest heaving. "You knew? You knew all this time and you never told me?" Her silence was louder than any answer. The room spun with betrayal, rage, disbelief. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the papers. "You ruined me," I whispered. My voice cracked, hollow. "Both of you." My mother's smile widened, almost satisfied. And then, before I could say more, the man, the one who claimed to be my father, leaned closer, his voice low, urgent. "There's more. What you've seen in that envelope, it's only the beginning. You're in danger, and if you don't come with me now, you'll understand too late." His words froze me. My pulse raced. Danger? I opened my mouth to demand what he meant. But in that moment, a sudden crash erupted from the end of the hallway. Glass shattering. Heavy footsteps. Someone else was here, and they weren't coming to talk. The crash ripped through the silence like a gunshot. Glass scattered across the floor at the far end of the hallway. Heavy footsteps followed, echoing closer, closer. My chest tightened, my grip on the papers loosening. The man, the one who claimed to be my father, grabbed my arm. "We have to move, now." But I froze. "What's happening?" My voice cracked, panic rising. "Who's out there?" He didn't answer. His eyes darted to the broken glass. His jaw clenched. He knew. Whoever it was, he knew. And my mother, she didn't flinch. She stood calmly in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression almost smug, like she had been expecting this. A figure stepped into view. Broad shoulders, a dark hood pulled low. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel the menace radiating off him. He wasn't here by accident. "Too late," my mother murmured. The man beside me cursed under his breath. He moved slightly in front of me, shielding me without hesitation. The hooded figure's voice was deep, distorted, almost metallic. "Hand it over." My blood ran cold. "What does he want?" I whispered. "The envelope," my father said tightly. "It's not just your birth papers. There are things in there, things people would kill for." My heart dropped. My fingers curled tighter around the papers I had barely begun to understand. The hooded man stepped closer. "Last chance. Give it to me." "No," my father snapped, his voice sharp, commanding. "Not tonight." The intruder reached into his jacket. The glint of metal flashed. I staggered back, my breath shallow. My mother still didn't move, didn't scream, didn't panic. She just stood there, watching like it was all part of her plan. I turned on her, rage boiling. "You set this up, didn't you?" Her lips curved into that cold, knowing smile. "Some truths are too heavy to carry. Better you lose it all now than drag it on your back forever." My hands trembled with fury. I wanted to shout, to claw answers from her, but the intruder's weapon gleamed closer. Everything happened at once. The hooded man lunged forward. My father shoved me back, the papers nearly flying from my hands. The weapon clattered against the floor. A fist struck, a grunt echoed, bodies slammed against the wall. I staggered toward the door, adrenaline surging, but my father's voice thundered over the chaos. "Don't run. If you leave now, they'll find you. Stay behind me." I froze, torn between instinct and fear. The fight raged, fists, grunts, shattering wood as the intruder drove him back against the wall. My father's strength held, but barely. The hooded figure was fast, relentless, like a machine built to destroy. Then the intruder's hand shot out, seizing my wrist. His grip was iron, crushing, yanking me forward. The envelope slipped, papers scattering across the floor like fallen feathers. "Let go!" I screamed, thrashing against him. My father roared, slamming into the man with enough force to break his hold. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching my wrist. "Run!" he barked, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. The intruder recovered quickly, his hood slipping back just enough for me to glimpse his face. Scarred, cold, eyes like shards of glass. He locked onto me, fury blazing. "This isn't over," he hissed, and with shocking speed, he bolted back down the hallway, stopping me disappearing through the shattered window he'd come from. The silence that followed was deafening. My chest heaved, my body trembling so violently I nearly collapsed. My father leaned against the wall, sweat and blood streaking his face, his breath ragged. I looked at the scattered papers, at the birth certificate, the letters, documents I didn't yet understand. My mother finally stepped forward, her voice calm, unshaken. "You see now, don't you?" she said. "This is bigger than you, bigger than us." I rounded on her, fury choking me. "You knew all along, you knew who he was, who I was, and you let me suffer in that house every day like a stranger in my own skin." Her eyes glittered, but she said nothing. My father pushed himself off the wall, his voice strained but firm. "Listen to me. That man, he'll be back. And worse will come. You can't stay here. You have to come with me." His words cut into me. Leave with him, after everything, after years of absence, of silence, of letting me rot in a life built on lies? I shook my head violently. "Why should I trust you? Why should I believe anything you say?" He stepped closer, his eyes raw, desperate. "Because if you don't, you'll end up like me. Running, hunted, always looking over your shoulder." I stared at him, my chest heaving, my mind spinning. Behind him, my mother whispered, almost like a curse, "Don't go with him. If you do, you'll never come back." My gaze darted between them. The man who claimed to be my father, offering escape and protection, and the mother who had raised me in shadows and silence, whose lies had shattered everything I thought I knew. The papers lay scattered at my feet, proof of a life I never asked for, a truth I didn't want but couldn't ignore. The weight of it pressed on me, suffocating, unbearable. My father extended his hand. "Choose. Now." My mother's eyes narrowed, her voice low, venomous. "Don't." The hallway seemed to close in on me, the air thick with dread. My pulse thundered in my ears. I looked at his hand, at her face, at the broken glass glinting on the floor, and in that moment I knew whatever choice I made would define me forever. I drew in a shaky breath. My fingers twitched. My heart screamed. And then I made my choice.